I lost everything: my wealth, my family, my health. My friends judged me. My wife told me to curse God and die. But did God really abandon me? What happened to me was not mere misfortune, not bad luck, nor a series of tragic events without explanation. What I faced was something far greater: a war. Not a war seen with the eyes, but a battle fought behind the scenes of the unseen, where my fate was discussed by forces that few would dare to imagine. Now tell me, have you ever felt crushed by suffering? Have you ever looked up to the sky and asked, why? Have you ever had the feeling that something greater is happening behind your pain, but no one can explain it? What happened to me might be the key to understanding what is happening to you. This story is not about tragedy, but about purpose. It is not about loss, but about the true meaning of faith. What you are about to hear is the truth that few dare to tell, and I must ask you, are you ready to know what really happened to me? Above the realms of men, there is an invisible court where destinies are discussed and decisions are made. It was in this setting that my story began, not in the desert where I lived, nor in the bustling streets where my name was known, but in a place where eternity meets time, and what happens there echoes in the lives of mortals. This is one of the great mysteries of the Bible, a divine revelation that few truly understand. The heavenly council was gathered, the presence of the Most High filled everything around, a majesty beyond human comprehension. Surrounding him stood the sons of God, beings of light, sent to fulfill his purposes on earth. Everything was in perfect order, until a shadow crept among them. A different presence, a figure that did not belong in that place, but for reasons beyond human understanding, was allowed to be there: Satan. The conversation that followed was one of the most enigmatic in biblical history. God, in his sovereignty, turned to him and asked a striking question: "Where have you come from?" It was not as if the Creator did not know, but every word from God carries a purpose, a hidden revelation. And the answer came, filled with arrogance, from roaming through the earth and walking back and forth on it. There was an implicit challenge in his words, an insinuation that the world was under his influence. And then came the question that would change everything: "Have you considered my servant Job?" It was at that moment that my name was spoken. God himself spoke of me before the entire heavenly assembly. He described my life with words that echoed through every corner of the universe. "There is no one on earth like him, a man of integrity and uprightness, who fears God and shuns evil." It was a powerful statement, but one that also provoked the adversary's disdain. Satan did not accept those words without protest. To him, human faith was conditional, a mere reflection of the blessings received. And so came the accusation that would trigger the greatest trial of my life: "Does Job fear God for nothing?" The adversary's logic was simple, yet laced with poison. He claimed that my faithfulness was not genuine, but merely the result of divine protection over me. "Stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." It was a direct challenge to my faith, a test of my integrity. In the spiritual realm, a battle was about to begin. And then came God's response, one that thundered through the corridors of the unseen. "Everything he has is in your power, but do not lay a finger on his life." And so, my fate was sealed. Without my knowledge, my name had been debated in the heights. Without my awareness, a limit had been set. From that moment on, everything I knew was about to be destroyed. But there was one thing the adversary did not understand: true faith is not bought with material wealth, nor does it depend on circumstances. And that would be the greatest revelation of this story. The spiritual battle that followed was not fought with swords or armies. It was an invisible yet fierce struggle. What was at stake was not just my life, but an eternal principle. And while decisions were being made in the heavens, on earth, the shadows had already begun to move. Something terrible was about to happen, and I had no idea what awaited me. The sun was still shining on the horizon when the first signs of disaster began to appear. It seemed like an ordinary day, no omens, no warnings. But in the spiritual realm, the wheels were already in motion, and what was about to happen would change everything forever. The first messenger arrived, breathless, his expression revealing that something terrible had happened. The Sabines attacked. They took all the oxen and donkeys and killed the servants. I alone have escaped to tell you. The news struck like a heavy blow, but before I could even process the tragedy, another man rushed in. Fire from God fell from the sky. It consumed all the sheep and the shepherds. I alone have survived. My heart was already weighed down when a third messenger appeared, covered in dust, his eyes wide with horror. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and took all the camels. They slaughtered your servants without mercy. I alone have escaped to tell you. Everything I had built, everything I had worked for over the years, was reduced to nothing in mere moments. But the worst news was yet to come. The fourth man entered, dragging his feet, his eyes carrying the weight of a devastating sentence. His voice was a whisper, broken by sorrow. Your children, his breath faltered. They were gathered at the oldest brother's house when a mighty wind came from the desert. The house collapsed on them. There are no survivors. The world, once solid and stable, crumbled beneath my feet. My mind tried to resist the impact, but like a building struck by an earthquake, everything inside me began to collapse. Who in their right mind could endure such horror? Who could remain standing after watching their entire life erased in the blink of an eye? The sound of the wind, the smell of dust, the memory of my children's laughter, all swirled together in a chaotic storm of pain and disbelief. What is expected of a man who loses everything? Anger? Despair? Endless questions? But something deep within me refused to give in to the abyss. I tore my robes, a sign of mourning and profound grief. I fell to the ground, but not in despair. Instead, I worshipped. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. The words escaped my lips like a sacred whisper, a truth that transcends human logic. For a man is not defined by what he owns, nor is his faith sustained by abundance. Everything belongs to God, everything is His. And even in the depths of suffering, my soul found the strength to acknowledge that His name remains worthy of praise. Heaven fell silent, the earth stood still. The spiritual realm witnessed something even the adversary had not foreseen. Stripped of everything, my faith remained unshaken. But this was only the beginning. The battle was far from over. The silence of heaven was broken once again. The adversary, frustrated that my faith remained unshaken despite the devastation, presented a new argument before God. Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. Once again, God allowed the attack, but with one restriction: my life had to be spared. And so, the second wave of suffering began. My body, once strong and healthy, became a battlefield. Horrific sores broke out across my skin, painful ulcers covered me from head to toe, the touch of the wind burned like sharp blades, every movement was unbearable torment. The most respected man in the region, who once sat among nobles and wise men, now crawled on the ground, seeking relief among the ashes. My flesh wasted away, and the pain gave me no rest. The human mind can endure many things, but when physical agony joins emotional suffering, the soul reaches the brink of collapse. I had already lost everything I owned. Now, even my health was being stripped away. Each passing day was a new torture, an existence that seemed to have no purpose other than suffering. What is expected of a man who finds himself at the bottom of the abyss? It was then that my wife spoke. The woman who had lived by my side, who had built with me everything we once had, now looked at me with a mix of despair and helplessness. Her eyes reflected not only my pain but her own as well. Then, with a trembling voice, she said, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." Many judge her, but who can truly condemn her? She was not merely looking at a suffering husband, she was looking at a man who was no longer recognizable. The stench of decay emanated from my body, my open wounds were a sight of horror. Despair consumed her, and her words were not an attack but the desperate cry of someone who could no longer bear to watch the suffering of the one she loved. She wanted it all to end, for the pain to cease once and for all. But my response came without hesitation. I lifted my gaze, weak yet resolute, and said, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" My faith was not a contract based on benefits, it did not depend on favorable circumstances. I did not worship God for what He gave me, but for who He was. If I accepted His blessings, how could I reject the trials He allowed? And so, even covered in sores, without strength, alone and rejected, my faith remained standing. But the worst was yet to come. The harshest judgments would come from those I least expected, and they would be just as cruel as the wounds that covered my skin. Time dragged on, and pain was no longer an unwelcome visitor, it had become my only companion. Sitting among the ashes, my body had turned into a battlefield between suffering and endurance. But then, in the distance, I saw 3 figures approaching. They were my friends, men of wisdom and respect, known for their eloquence and discernment. Eliphaz, Bildad and Zophar. Their faces were filled with sorrow, and when they saw me, they could not hide their shock. Did they recognize me, or did they see only a shadow of the man I once was? Torn garments, skin covered in sores, an empty gaze, it was hard to believe that the once prosperous and respected man had been reduced to such a state. And then, I was caught by yet another surprise. They sat down beside me, they did not say a single word. For 7 days and 7 nights, they remained there in absolute silence. In that culture, mourning this intense was reserved only for the dead. To them, I was no longer among the living. When they finally spoke, I expected comfort, words that would bring hope or at least understanding, but what came was judgment. It didn't take long for suspicion to turn into accusation. "Job, you have sinned. God would not punish a righteous man this way." Eliphaz was the first to speak. He believed that suffering never came without cause, that my pain was the consequence of some hidden wrongdoing. "Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed?" Bildad reinforced the argument. "If your children have sinned against God, He gave them over to the penalty of their sin. To Him, my suffering was a just punishment." And Zophar, perhaps the most ruthless of the 3, declared without hesitation, "Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin." The pain of words can be worse than any wound. I had already lost everything, and now I had to fight to defend the only thing I had left, my integrity. Was I truly guilty? Had I unknowingly offended God at some point in my life? My mind searched for answers, but my heart knew the truth. I had always feared the Lord. I had always walked in His ways, so why was I being treated as a criminal before Him? How many times have you been judged by those who were supposed to help you? How many times have you sought comfort only to find condemnation? My friends had come to console me, but in the end, they only added to my pain. I was alone, facing not only my misery but also the piercing words of those who should have understood my suffering. The trial had begun, the verdict seemed certain. But where was my advocate? Who could speak for me before God? The silence of heaven had become unbearable. I endured the loss, accepted the pain, listened to the accusations, but inside me, something was beginning to break. It was not my faith that was crumbling, but my understanding of the world, of justice, of God Himself. And then, my cry shattered the veil of resignation. Cursed be the day I was born, may the night of my conception be erased forever. My words echoed like a lament torn from the depths of despair. If my life was destined to be a sea of suffering, why was I brought into existence? Why did light reach me if darkness was my fate? Why do the wicked prosper while the righteous are crushed by adversity? I did not curse the Creator, but I questioned the mysteries of His plan. My mind spun around a dilemma that has haunted mankind since the beginning of time. If God is just, why does He allow the innocent to suffer? If He governs all things, why do the wicked remain untouched, living in abundance, while the upright know only tears and ruin? Where is divine logic when those who sow destruction reap peace, and those who walk the straight path find only thorns? The physical pain was unbearable, but the agony of the soul burned even more. The God I feared, the God I worshipped, the God I had served with all that I had, now seemed distant. My heart longed for answers, but all I found was silence. And in the absence of explanations, my words became my only companions. The cry of a righteous man who could not understand what was happening to him. The plea of a man who, even in his misery, still longed to understand the purpose of God. The wind began to blow, and suddenly, everything around me fell silent. The dust rose from the ashes where I sat, and the air grew thick and heavy, as if all creation were waiting for something great to unfold. Then, He spoke. The voice that shaped the heavens and the earth broke the silence, not to give me shallow explanations, but to unveil a profound revelation about the reality of the universe and human suffering. Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? My heart trembled, the ground beneath me seemed to disappear. For days, I had cried out for an answer. I had shouted to the heavens, questioned, demanded to know the reason for my suffering. Now, God was here, speaking directly to me. But His words were not what I had expected. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you understand. My chest tightened. What could I possibly say? God began to reveal the vastness of His works, not to belittle me, but to help me see that there was a greater order beyond what my limited eyes could perceive. He spoke of the sea, held back by invisible boundaries, of the clouds that carry the rain, of the dawn that drives out the darkness like a victorious warrior. Every detail of creation declared that nothing happens without purpose. If even the forces of nature follow a divine order, how could human suffering be outside of His control? But there was more. The Lord was not merely reminding me of the greatness of creation, He was revealing something beyond my own pain. I was being watched. My endurance in the face of despair was not just a testimony before men, but before the spiritual world. Satan, who had questioned my integrity from the beginning, expected me to break, to fall, to crumble under the weight of suffering. But my faithfulness, even in pain, was a living testimony that true faith is not bought with blessings nor destroyed by loss. And it was not only Satan who was watching. The very angels, beings who beheld the majesty of God, yet did not fully comprehend the depths of divine justice, were learning through my trial. My suffering was not a random punishment, it was part of something far greater. A spiritual battle was unfolding, and my perseverance was a powerful declaration that the truly righteous do not bow to evil. My words became dust. My suffering was real, but it was not the center of the universe. What God was showing me was not just His sovereignty, but the reality that everything, even pain, has a greater purpose within His will. The issue was never merely the reason for my affliction, but the limited perspective with which I viewed it. God was not ignoring my suffering. He was teaching me that something far greater was at work, something I had to acknowledge, even if I could not fully understand it. And there, in the midst of the wind and the voice that upholds all creation, my soul finally understood. God does not merely call us to trust in Him. He reveals that our trials are living testimonies that echo beyond this world. Nothing happens without a purpose, and my life, though marked by suffering, was proof that true righteousness cannot be shaken. The words of God pierced my soul like a burning fire. I, who once cried out for explanations, now saw the world differently. My pain had not vanished, but I had come to understand something that had once escaped me. My vision was limited, and the ways of the Most High were far greater than I could comprehend. In light of this revelation, my complaints ceased. My mouth, once filled with questions, now opened in humility. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted, I confessed, bowing before my Creator. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. I did not repent of hidden sins, for my integrity had never been in question. But I repented of the way I had tried to measure God within the limits of my own understanding. What I had once judged as injustice was, in reality, a purpose far greater than I could see. And then, the unexpected happened. God did not only answer my silent questions with His greatness, He also restored my life. Everything I had lost was given back to me in double measure: wealth, livestock, land. But the true reward was not material. My greatest blessing was not in the possessions I regained, but in the revelation that transformed me. I had been tested in the furnace of affliction, and my faith had endured. Now, my life was a living testimony of divine justice. My friends, who once accused me, saw they were wrong and were instructed by God to seek my intercession. My family, who had mourned my downfall, now witnessed my restoration, and my own eyes, which once saw only pain, now beheld the truth, that suffering is not about loss or punishment but about purpose. God had not merely allowed my pain, He had used it to reveal His glory. And so, I understood that the true reward of faith is not found in riches that can be lost or gained, but in the real encounter with the Creator, who shapes us even in the midst of the storm. And that, indeed, was an eternal treasure. If a righteous man can suffer so much, what does that mean for you and me? If Job, a man of integrity, declared so by God Himself, was tested to his very limits and cast into the deepest abyss of pain, then suffering cannot be a measure of who we are to our Heavenly Father. Because, contrary to what many believe, pain is not a sign of rejection, nor is prosperity a seal of approval. Job learned this in the most brutal way possible. And perhaps, without realizing it, we are living the same lesson. How many times have we looked up to the heavens seeking answers, only to be met with silence? How many times have we felt abandoned, treated unfairly, as if we were suffering for something we did not deserve? Like Job, we question, we want to understand. But what if the real answer is not in a why, but in a for what? Job wanted explanations, God gave him a revelation. Job wanted justice, God showed him sovereignty. Job wanted relief, God gave him purpose. Job's suffering was not in vain. It became living proof that there is more beyond our understanding, that there is an unseen realm where our faithfulness echoes. That true faith is not built on rewards but on unwavering trust. And this is the question that must resonate in our hearts. Does our faith depend on circumstances, or is it built on the rock of eternity? The world today is not so different from the one Job lived in. There is still pain, still injustice, still unanswered questions. But if there is one thing this story teaches us, it is that God has not abandoned us. He has not forgotten us. His silence does not mean His absence, and waiting is never without purpose. When God finally spoke to Job, He did not merely restore what was lost, He revealed something far greater, the certainty that He had been there all along. Maybe you are facing your own trial right now. Maybe your losses have been too great, your pain too intense, your path too dark. But Job's story does not end in pain, it ends in redemption, and the same God who sustained Job is the God who can sustain you. Now I ask you, have you ever faced suffering so great that you question God? Have you ever felt like Job, alone in the ashes, waiting for an answer? If so, share your story. Leave your experience in the comments, because just as Job's trial strengthened many, your journey can also be a testimony to someone who needs to hear this. And in the end, like Job, we too may look back and say, "Before, I had only heard of God, but now, my eyes have seen Him."